She pulled the gate shut with that smug little wrist flick she always did when she was making a point. The designer suitcase wheels clicked once across the cobblestone before catching in a crack. She didn't even glance back, just yanked it, adjusted her oversized sunglasses, and strutted like the front yard was a runway. I was still holding the garden hose. "Don't do this, Valerie," I said, quiet but not passive. The water was running, pooling around my shoes. She stopped at the edge of the driveway, just long enough to tilt her head and raise her voice. Not to me, but to whatever imaginary audience she thought she had. "It's a business trip, Mark. I know that's hard for you to grasp from your little suburban watering can fantasy, but some of us have lives." "Yeah," I nodded, letting the hose soak the lawn. "Just make sure your life doesn't expect to come back through this gate." That got her to turn. Briefly, the corner of her mouth curled into what she probably thought was a smirk, but it looked more like a tick, like her face hadn't quite caught up to her bravado. "You're paranoid," she said, starting to roll the suitcase again. "It's all your work, Mark. You made everything so dull I needed a damn break." I didn't argue. I just shut off the hose, coiled it like I always did. Neat loops, same hook in the garage wall. Rituals are funny like that. They calm your hands when your brain is revving up for war. An hour later, she posted the first photo. From the airport lounge. Champagne, stem tilted like she was auditioning for a reality show. Caption read, "Some men water plants. Real men book jets." I didn't like the post. Didn't comment. Didn't even save it. I just walked into my office, the one she never bothered to ask about, because to her I was retired. Opened the drawer labeled contingency. It was alphabetical, right under crisis communications and above dissolution. What was in there wasn't revenge. It wasn't even rage. It was precision. Letters, contracts, access logs. A printed amendment from 7 years ago, back when I was still drafting executive contracts as a favor for an old friend. Valerie had no idea that friend was Glenn, or that the man she thought she was seducing away from his family happened to owe half his golden parachute terms to me. She never once asked why our house was in my name alone, why I insisted we live inside that specific gated community with those specific bylaws, or why I still paid for 3 different data providers even though we only had 2 phones. Because Valerie never looked down. She only looked at what sparkled, and by the time she noticed something was off, the floor would already be gone beneath her heels. Before I go on, if you're listening to this and you're not subscribed yet, maybe do it now. More than 90% of you tune in without hitting that little button. And yeah, it's free, but it also tells the team this kind of story still matters. So if you're into watching people who think they're untouchable get silently audited by someone who's been underestimated too long, well, you know what to do. Back to Valerie. She thought she was posting champagne and cheeky captions. She didn't realize her boss's calendar had just pinged a red event titled Board Travel Audit, triggered. She didn't know that the private car service she booked on Glenn's company card had just been flagged under a very specific internal code. PEX 42B. Personal excursion executed. Section 42B. Which, as it happened, I wrote. And which meant that if even one member of the board raised concern about flight justification, the CFO had full legal grounds to revoke travel access for non-essential personnel during pending review. It didn't require a vote, just one call. I made that call on the way to the garage. Same Bluetooth headset she once made fun of. "You look like a mall cop," she laughed. Maybe, but mall cops know how to lock a door from the inside. Glenn wouldn't even get the courtesy of a warning. The system would ping him directly at the gate. Tickets revoked. Flags triggered. Escalation paths already defined. And her? Valerie would be standing beside him, trying to figure out why the champagne bottle at 36,000 feet was no longer an option, and why the man she left holding a hose on Sunday was about to make Monday the most expensive day of her life. The office didn't look like much from the outside. Sandstone facade, generic plaque with initials no one remembered. Not flashy, not glass-walled. Just 5 floors of deliberate invisibility. The kind of building you pass without wondering who's inside. That was the point. Mark stepped through the front door without checking in. The receptionist nodded like she'd been briefed long ago never to ask questions. He took the elevator alone, 5th floor, keycard still active. Valerie never knew he kept the lease. She assumed retired meant gardening and afternoon baseball. The lights flickered on automatically. Darkwood paneling. A single portrait on the wall, one of the founding board members. They'd made the mistake of crossing Mark once. Their frame now hung on the far wall, carefully centered. Not out of respect, but as a placeholder. He walked to the filing cabinet, One of 3 in the corner behind the desk. Not digitized. Not cloud-backed. That was the brilliance of it. Some things live safer on paper. No hacks. No leaks. Just a cold steel drawer and a key. He unlocked the second drawer. Flipped through the tabs. Audit templates. C. Crisis drafts. G. Golden parachute. There it was. He pulled the black binder labeled GP, Flight Risk _V3. Thick as a phone book. Indexed. Clean. He opened to the flagged page, page 47, and read it again even though he could recite it backwards. Amendment B. 2. Golden parachute contingency, flight risk clause. In the event of unsanctioned executive travel accompanied by non-authorized personnel, the board reserves the right to initiate discretionary suspension of access, initiate review of discretionary asset use, and trigger Phase 1 audit review. Suspensions may be enacted automatically by the CFO if executive activity meets conditions A, B, and C. He smiled, because Valerie had met all 3. Condition A, executive use of company-funded travel for non-essential purposes. Condition B, companion not listed on personnel structure. Condition C, companion tied to flagged discretionary spending in the last quarter. She'd done all 3 without blinking. Mark flipped to the adjacent tab. 1 phone number, still valid. Not Glenn, not even the CEO, just the motion officer for the board, a woman named Diane who owed him a favor. A favor signed 12 years ago, involving a quietly buried scandal and a 10-minute call that saved her marriage, her shares, and her spine. He pressed the number. It rang once. Diane, he said, need to push a travel motion up the docket. Executive level. Flight risk triggered. Name, Glenn Harmon. A pause. Then a tone shift. Understood. Also need asset exposure on companion discretionary. Valerie Harmon. Another pause. You want this escalated to board legal or just internal? Start with internal, but make sure it leaks. She chuckled softly, still surgical as ever. Just slower hands, not a slower mind. He hung up and dropped the binder into the burn box next to the safe. He wouldn't need it again. He walked to the small window, looked out at the concrete skyline. Valerie thought he didn't matter anymore. Thought he was out of the game. But what she didn't understand was that retirement wasn't the end of power. It was just a change in venue. You stop running the race, and you start designing the track. Valerie's little affair with Glenn wasn't just infidelity. It was trespassing. She'd stepped onto a board he helped build, played footsie with an executive who still answered to policies he had personally written. She never asked who wrote Glenn's severance clause. Never asked who gave the green light on his hiring. Never wondered why Glenn never talked to Mark at holiday parties, or why the 2 of them never once made eye contact. Because Glenn knew. And that was the beauty of it. This wasn't rage. It wasn't jealousy. It was engineering. He pulled out one more document, an old one. A contract from when Valerie had taken her first position with Glenn's firm. Hidden in the standard boilerplate was a line most people missed. Spouse/partner relationships involving firm executives may be subject to third-party ethics review if conflicts of interest arise. She'd signed it. Of course she had. Back when she still spelled her name with a little heart over the I on thank you notes. And now, Mark was that third party. Quiet. Legal. Unavoidable. He sent the final email to the board's internal legal group. Just 3 sentences, no flair, no threats. Motion to review discretionary travel. Asset exposure suggests non-compliant pattern. Full audit requested under Clause B, 2. He didn't sign it, Mark. He used his board title. M.T. Harmon, Non-Executive Policy Advisor. Board of Ethics and Internal Governance. 5 minutes later, the CFO's inbox pinged. The system flagged Glenn's travel itinerary. The companion listed under Personal Guest triggered a subroutine. Valerie's name pinged again, this time from a card swipe at the executive lounge using a corporate account. Phase 1 audit was greenlit. And Valerie? She was mid-laugh in a private lounge, swirling champagne like it was invincibility. She didn't know the clock had just started, or that by the time she reached the gate, the door wouldn't open. Because the man she thought was done was just getting ready to file. The gate agent smiled at first. One of those professional, barely there smiles that belong to corporate brochures and dental clinics. Glenn stepped forward confidently, handed her the boarding passes like he was offering winning lottery tickets. Valerie adjusted her sunglasses again, indoors, of course, and tapped her heel impatiently. She didn't like waiting in lines. She'd made that clear with a smirk and an Instagram caption the night before. Coach is a mindset. Private is a lifestyle. The agent scanned the first pass. Beep. Scanned it again. Longer beep. Her smile faltered. One moment, sir. She glanced at her screen, then at Glenn. I'm getting a flag on this booking. Glenn raised an eyebrow. Flag. Access revoked, she said carefully, as if reading it twice in her mind before speaking it aloud. Looks like this flight is no longer available under the current credentials. Valerie snorted. What is that? Airline speak for try again. We're global elite. The agent looked at her politely, not responding. Let me check with the supervisor. Glenn's phone buzzed. He glanced down, casually at first. One text. From his CFO. Pull back. Now. Audit triggered. Do not board. He stared at it. Buzz. Another one. He knows. Just 2 words. No name. No explanation. But he knew exactly who it meant. His hand dropped slowly to his side. Shoulders stiffened. The blood visibly drained from his face. Valerie, mid-sentence about her Amex benefits, caught the shift. What? Glenn, what is it? He turned toward her, slowly, like his neck had forgotten how to move naturally. What the hell? He said, barely above a whisper. Did you make him do? Valerie blinked. What? Another uniformed agent walked up, whispered something to the gate attendant. She nodded grimly, picked up the intercom. Flight 378 to Nassau has closed boarding. Final call has passed. Mr. Harmon, Ms. Harmon, please step aside. People behind them began murmuring. A child asked loudly, Mommy, why can't they go? Valerie forced a laugh. This is a mistake. We're on the manifest. Aren't we on the manifest? Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Glenn didn't answer. He was still staring at his phone, now scrolling with a visible tremor in his hand. Emails were flooding in, internal memos, inquiry notifications, compliance alerts. All of them bearing the same header. Board trigger, ethics phase 1, travel and discretionary review. The plane was still at the gate. They could see it. 30 feet away. The final passengers walked down the ramp. But they couldn't move. Because Valerie had played high-stakes roulette with a man who didn't raise his voice. He rewrote the rules. Quietly. Permanently. Sir, the supervisor said, we'll need to ask you both to accompany us to the lounge for further clarification. Clarification. Valerie clung to that word like a drowning woman grabs driftwood. Yes, let's do that, she said, trying to fix her tone. There's clearly been a mix-up. Glenn, tell them. But Glenn didn't move. He wasn't walking toward the lounge. He was watching the last email load. An internal memo from legal compliance, board level. Review scope includes discretionary accounts, personal guest expenses, and executive asset use. Full travel freeze enacted. Counsel advised. Valerie tugged on his arm. Glenn. He turned, slowly, and looked her in the eye. Do you understand what you've done? She blinked, wide-eyed. I didn't. Mark wouldn't. He's retired. Glenn. No, Glenn said. He's a ghost in the system. And you just walked me into a minefield. She opened her mouth to argue, but there was nothing to say. The gate behind them shut with a mechanical hiss. The jet bridge began to retract. They weren't going anywhere. And for the first time in weeks, Valerie didn't feel glamorous or witty or clever. She felt like luggage. Unclaimed. Unwelcome. Stamped with a barcode no one would scan. The elevator ride was slow. The kind of deliberately slow that tells you the building doesn't rush for anyone. Mark stood alone, hands clasped loosely behind his back, watching the floor numbers change like he had all the time in the world. He didn't. He just made people believe he did. When the doors opened, the firm's internal counsel was already waiting, standing beside the glass conference room with a file folder under one arm and a face that said we knew this was coming. We just hoped it wouldn't. Her name was Lauren. Smart, precise, allergic to gossip. Mark liked her. I read the motion, she said as he entered. Trigger came through compliance and audit. You want this escalated? No, he said, setting down a smaller file of his own. I want it documented. I want it clean. No emotion, no interpretation. Just facts. They sat. She opened her file. He opened his. Let's begin with the discretionary spending tied to Executive Account 7B, he said. Specifically, Subaccount 7B, private, listed under Glenn Harmon's signature. Lauren tapped keys on her laptop. That's his personal expense draw. Within rights, if used appropriately. Mark slid a single paper across the table. It was a dining receipt. For figures. Wine older than the intern who processed it. Glenn's signature in blue ink. Underneath it, Valerie's name. As of that date, Mark said calmly. Was she an employee? Lauren didn't answer. She was already pulling up HR records. Valerie's file appeared. On temporary contract, she read aloud. But not active for that pay period. Authorization pending. No formal role assigned. And yet, Mark added, tapping the receipt, she was taken to an executive dinner billed to the company, marked as project collaboration. Lauren sat back. Second item, Mark continued, flipping a page. Airfare booked under executive access A3. Business class, international, listed as partner travel, compliance exempt. He looked up. There is no such exemption. Lauren exhaled through her nose. There isn't. At least not anymore. Correct, Mark said. It was removed 2 fiscal cycles ago. I wrote the memo myself. She nodded once. You're setting up an ethics breach. Pattern behavior. Paper trail. I'm not setting up anything. I'm simply presenting what exists. He reached into his case again, this time pulling out a copy of the shadow budget. This wasn't the official budget, the one filed with quarterly earnings and polished for investor decks. This was the internal ledger. Real numbers. Unfiltered allocations. Where the dirty footprints were. Valerie had touched it. He knew it. She wouldn't be able to resist. He flipped to page 18. Highlighted line item. Special discretionary reimbursement, client enrichment fund. Next to it, a handwritten note. Not Glenn's handwriting. Valerie's. She'd been in his office. Probably after hours. Probably thought she was being clever, annotating a line no one would check. But Mark checked everything. That was his quiet obsession, catching the things no one was supposed to see. Lauren looked at it. She had no clearance to even access this. Which, Mark said, is why I'd like it included in the file. If you don't mind. There was a long pause. Then she asked, carefully, do you want her removed from the consultant roles? Officially. Mark leaned back. No. I want her listed as under review. I want the audit to decide. I want her to sit in uncertainty. Let her hear every door creak, wondering if it's the end. Don't close the door. Leave it open just enough that she sees it could slam shut at any moment. Lauren didn't flinch. She just nodded. Understood. They sat in silence for a few seconds, the kind of silence that builds when there's too much clarity in a room. Then Mark said, add one more document. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an old company memo, dated 5 years back. It outlined rules for executive discretionary power post-incident, when an executive had been caught billing personal travel as business expansion. The memo had been co-signed by Glenn. Mark tapped the signature with his index finger. He knew the rules. He helped write them. Lauren closed the folder. This goes above HR, she said. We'll need to inform legal and risk. I'd prefer if the board hears first. Diane knows what to do. Lauren nodded. You're not asking for his removal? No, Mark said again. Because I don't have to. And he meant it. Glenn wasn't going to survive this. Not because Mark made a grand case, but because Mark built the structure Glenn had walked into. The walls weren't closing in. They were already closed. Glenn just hadn't noticed until the lights flickered. As for Valerie, she was somewhere in an airport lounge, still refreshing her flight status. Probably still blaming technical issues. She had no idea the turbulence wasn't in the air. It was at 30,000 feet below, in boardrooms, inboxes, and document archives where her name was now officially part of an investigation folder labeled Phase 1, Conflict Exposure. No screaming. No scandals. No press. Just the sound of a career unraveling on company letterhead. The rideshare driver didn't say a word the entire ride. Valerie had slammed the car door hard enough to rattle the dashboard, her suitcase thumping in the trunk like it had something to prove. She'd marched across the airport like someone owed her a parade and barked at 2 flight agents before stomping out to the curb. Now she was scrolling through her phone, muttering. Messages unanswered. Glenn had stopped replying after her 3rd text. Her last one, we need to get ahead of this, still had no red receipt. That terrified her more than the gate debacle. As the car pulled up to the gated entrance of their upscale neighborhood, she leaned over. You can just drop me at the mailbox. I'll walk to the house. The driver nodded. The gate stood silent in the midday sun, untouched elegance. Valerie keyed in her access code. The screen flashed red, access denied. She blinked. Tried again. Access denied. She hissed, you've got to be kidding me, and hit the call button for the HOA security line. A clipped voice answered. Sunridge Estates, HOA. Hi, this is Valerie Harmon. My gate code isn't working. A pause. Oh, the voice said. Ma'am, ownership of that property was recently transferred. That access code has been deactivated per protocol. Valerie's stomach dropped. Transferred? To who? That house is. I'm sorry, the voice interrupted. We're not authorized to disclose private ownership details over the phone. You'll need to speak with your attorney. Before she could shout, the line went dead. The car was already pulling away. She marched up to the gate, ready to press her face against the camera, but the lens had already dimmed, as if even it had decided she was no longer worth recognizing. She muttered a curse, reached into her purse, and pulled out her phone to open the smart home app. She'd connected everything: lights, doors, cameras, HVAC. Mark never touched it. He hated tech. If it needs an update to let me in, it's not a house. It's a hostage situation. At the time she'd laughed. Now she was the one locked out. She opened the app. It spun, then blinked off. No connected properties. She tried again. Nothing. She clicked through to the admin panel. You are no longer listed as a user. Valerie just stood there, wind kicking up her blazer. Her feet aching from airport heels she hadn't taken off. Her suitcase sat beside her like a silent witness. She finally gave up and walked the long route, around the gate, through the landscaped edge path, and back to the house she still referred to as ours. Except it wasn't. Not anymore. The driveway was empty. No mail in the box. Porch light dead. She stepped up to the front door and froze. Taped to the glass was a single envelope. White. Her name on the front, in Mark's handwriting. Not cursive. Not threatening. Just matter of fact. She ripped it open. Inside, one line on a piece of standard printer paper. You took flight. So did your access. No signature. No return address. She stood there, stunned. The lock blinked red. The air conditioning she used to complain about. It's always freezing in here. Why can't you just fix it? Was gone. Dead silence behind that door. Her entire home, shut off like a scene change. She checked her phone again. Opened her banking app. 2 accounts. Not 3. She clicked the missing one. Account no longer linked. Authorization revoked. She clicked the utilities: water, power, gas. All returned the same. Account transferred. No access. Her breathing became shallow. The neighborhood felt foreign. Too still. Too manicured. She walked around back, hoping maybe, the sliding glass door would still work. It didn't. Motion lights didn't even flicker. From the outside, it was her house. Inside, it might as well have been a museum exhibit she used to visit. She sat down on the front steps. Her phone vibrated. She thought maybe Glenn was finally calling. It wasn't. It was a system notification. Your Apple ID has been removed from this HomeKit network. Then, a new owner has taken over primary control. She stared at the screen, refusing to blink. Mark hadn't yelled. He hadn't slammed a door. He'd just revoked her. Digitally. Legally. Quietly. The kind of revenge that doesn't scorch the earth, just erases you from the map. The gate behind her clicked softly as it reset. Valerie looked up at the sky, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel big enough for her ego. Because it wasn't hers anymore. It never really had been. Glenn arrived late. Not fashionably, not strategically, just late. The kind of late that makes secretaries whisper and investors look at each other over the rims of their espresso cups. His tie was crooked. Shirt clung a little too tightly around the neck. Sweat just beginning to pool at the base of his spine, despite the air-conditioned luxury of the 10th floor boardroom. Mark was already there, seated at the far end, same position he always chose. Not the head of the table, too obvious. Not the middle, too exposed. Just enough distance to see everything, speak when necessary, and disappear when not. He didn't look up when Glenn entered, just turned a page in the folder in front of him and adjusted his reading glasses. The casual kind of composure that tells the room, this has already been decided. Diane, the board chair, cleared her throat. Thank you all for joining on short notice. We have urgent matters tied to executive conduct and discretionary compliance. That's when Glenn's stomach really turned. Because the phrase executive conduct was never used lightly, and never publicly, unless someone had already been thrown to legal. He sat down, nodded stiffly. I assume this is about the audit notice? Mark spoke without looking at him. It's about the pattern that triggered it. Lauren, the same internal counsel from before, passed around a one-page summary. Stapled top left. No fanfare. No appendices. Just bullet points. Executive, Glenn Harmon. Board motion. Phase 1 review. Unscheduled audit initiated. Findings, preliminary. Use of executive travel without proper authorization. Reimbursement of non-employee companion under personal expense channel. Access given to unauthorized individual to internal budgeting software. Repeated overrides of flagged discretionary items. Breach of internal compliance memo dated FY-5, co-signed by G. Harmon. There was a silence. The kind that fills with too many internal calculations. Glenn scanned the paper quickly. His name was printed 4 times. Valerie's, just once. But that one line was poison. Non-employee companion, V. Harmon, listed as project liaison, no contract filed. He looked up, trying to find an ally. Diane was unreadable. One board member was already typing on an iPad. Another just adjusted their watch. And Mark? Still hadn't looked at him. This is absurd, Glenn started. Valerie was. Look, she was consulting. Informally. Yes, maybe the paperwork wasn't. Mark finally spoke. She accessed financial dashboards at 2:43 a.m. on a Saturday. From your office terminal. The access logs were time-stamped and paired to your keycard. Excuse me, Glenn snapped. Are we pretending this is criminal? She's my guest. Mark folded his hands. She's your guest. Not ours. And certainly not the board's. Lauren's voice cut in, measured, neutral. Whether criminal or not, the exposure is reputational. We've already had one investor inquiry. That's enough for this board to act. Glenn looked down the table, but the eyes weren't meeting his anymore. Just paperwork and coffee cups. The vote happened like they always do in corporate warfare, quiet, clinical, unanimous. Motion to suspend Mr. Harmon pending audit findings. Effective immediately. Diane didn't ask for discussion, didn't look for debate, just tapped her gavel once. Mostly symbolic, since they'd done away with formal gaveling years ago. But it hit like a hammer anyway. Meeting adjourned. Glenn waited until the room started to empty, then stalked toward Mark. Really, he said low. You couldn't just talk to me? Mark stood, adjusted his cuff, finally looked him in the eyes. You didn't talk when you booked the flight. Glenn looked around. Everyone was pretending not to watch. Mark added, quietly, you brought personal chaos into a structure I helped build. You gambled with policy. And you did it with someone who doesn't even spell her last name the same way twice on tax documents. Glenn swallowed. She said you were retired. I am, Mark said. That's why I have time for due diligence. Then he walked past him, slow and deliberate. As Glenn stood there, phone buzzing in his pocket, another message appeared. Investor alert, portfolio rebalancing, pending executive risk review. The ripples were already reaching Wall Street. He pulled out his phone and opened the investor dashboard. Valerie had just texted again. Did you fix it? He didn't reply. He couldn't even remember how to spell control anymore. The first notification came through while she was in the hotel bathroom, brushing her teeth with the same energy she used to deliver passive-aggressive jabs over brunch. Her phone lit up on the marble counter. Then again, and again. By the time she finished rinsing, it looked like a Christmas tree. She picked it up, half smirking. Maybe it's Glenn. Maybe he fixed it. But the screen didn't show his name. It showed headlines. The first one read, Bergstrom Group quietly withdraws from multi-year partnership with Harmon Strategic. The article was dry, polite. Realignment of vision, philosophical differences, unforeseen reputational risk. But Valerie had been in enough rooms to read between the lines. They weren't just canceling a contract. They were disowning a connection. She clicked the next one. A post from an anonymous insider account. Client retreat, guest list scrubbed. No more plus ones, with designer bags and NDA mouths. You know who you are. She stared at that sentence, the way someone stares at a locked door they forgot to check twice. Because just 3 weeks ago, that client, Bergstrom's VP of Strategy, had invited her personally to their winter retreat in Telluride. Private lodge, catered dinners, luxury gear with logos on the sleeves. The kind of trip people didn't post publicly, but everyone talked about after. Glenn had said it would be great optics. She had said, I'll pack something backless. Now, Bergstrom had not only pulled out of the partnership, they'd made it public. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, robes slipping from her shoulder, mascara still untouched. The little spinning hotel room mirror caught her reflection, and for once, she didn't like what she saw. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was just a trend alert. Hashtag Valerie Harmon, briefly trending in finance Twitter. The comments weren't kind. Some were cruel. Most were sarcastic. A few were surgical. When your networking session gets flagged by 3 ethics committees and a gate agent. Corporate Barbie meets HR protocol. New rule. No more +1s who call themselves energy consultants. She wanted to scream. To throw the phone across the room. To sue someone. But the emotion that actually hit her first? Aloneness. She opened her messages. Scrolled down to Glenn. Typed. Did you know Bergstrom was pulling out? Call me. Please. Delivered. Not read. She called him. Voicemail. His recorded voice sounded like it had been left in a drawer too long. Detached. Bored. Formal. You've reached Glenn Harmon. Leave a message. She hung up. Tried again. Blocked. She blinked. Checked her contact list. Scrolled to Mark. Hit call. The dial tone never came. Just a one-line error. This number is no longer accepting calls from your contact. The phone slid from her hand onto the hotel comforter. She stared at it like it might suddenly fix itself, like the network would apologize and reconnect her to the people she used to control, seduce, or manipulate at will. But it just sat there, dead and glowing. She pulled her laptop onto her lap, trying to find a distraction. Maybe one of her brand partners had posted a photo. Maybe a new email came in confirming her spot on the speaking panel next quarter. But the inbox was quiet. Too quiet. She clicked into one of the finance forums. Searched her name. Someone had posted the now infamous gate video. Grainy, shot from a few rows back. There she was, Valerie, in full designer flight wear, arguing with the airline agent while Glenn looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 seconds. Caption: when your business trip turns into a compliance seminar. 26,000 views. And climbing. The comment that stung the most wasn't the cruelest. It was the truest. She really thought the guy watering hedges was done with her. Nah, he was just waiting for the right clause to bloom. She closed the laptop, turned off her phone, and sat in the hotel silence, wrapped in a robe that suddenly felt 2 sizes too big. The bed was too cold. The room was too still. And the life she'd spent years building on charm, deflection, and other people's money was collapsing through her screen, one notification at a time. Valerie waited until nearly midnight to call, not because it was strategic, but because it took that long to convince herself she still had leverage. Some piece of history, some flicker of loyalty, some remnant of a bond that hadn't been vaporized by the past 2 weeks. Haley didn't answer at first, just voicemail. Valerie almost hung up, but the beep came too fast. Haley, it's me. Look, I know things are bad right now. I know your father is probably telling you a version of events that makes me look. She stopped herself, regrouped. That makes me look worse than I deserve. But you know me. You know I tried. I was there. I raised you, didn't I? Please call me back. She ended the call and stared at the screen, thumb hovering. No read receipt. Just silence. Then, 20 minutes later, her phone vibrated. One message. No greeting. No punctuation. Just a photo. Valerie tapped it. It was a scan of a deed. Clean. Crisp. Official. Haley's full name at the top. Haley and Miller. Below it, property description. 0.87 acres. Single-family dwelling. Title transferred in full. Signature line. Mark T. Harmon. No lawyer's signature. No cosigner. Just him. Underneath the photo, Haley had added a short message. He said to build something that couldn't be taken from me. That was it. Valerie stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Not because she didn't understand, but because she finally did. Mark wasn't just punishing her. He was replacing her. Quietly. Deliberately. Piece by piece. She scrolled up through their old texts. The birthday photos. The time she and Haley went to that ridiculous candle-making class. The picture of the two of them holding up lopsided soy wax disasters with matching aprons. She remembered thinking back then, if Mark ever leaves, I'll still have Haley. She didn't. Because Haley had made her decision. And it wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was a property deed with a single signature. A signature that used to sign things for her. Valerie sat on the edge of the hotel bed, robe half fallen off one shoulder, and finally started crying. Not for the money. Not even for Glenn, who still hadn't returned a single call, but for the realization that she had been edited out of her own life. No arguments. No confrontation. Just a series of forms, contracts, and transactions that had removed her name from everything she thought was permanent. Haley had taken her place, not just emotionally, but legally, structurally, generationally. That house. Valerie had picked out the countertops. She remembered holding up tile samples in a Home Depot like she was building a legacy. Now it was Haley's. The woman Valerie used to say was Mark's pet project had become the one holding the keys. And Valerie was sitting in a hotel room paid for on a credit card she wasn't sure would clear tomorrow. She wanted to call back. Wanted to scream. Wanted to explain. But what would she even say? Please don't let your father erase me. He already had. Not with fury. Not with cruelty. With precision. Mark had taken everything she weaponized, status, charm, entitlement, and audited it. Then rebuilt it under someone else's name. Someone who wouldn't forget anniversaries. Someone who didn't post champagne selfies in executive lounges. Someone who, when told, build something that can't be taken from you, actually listened. Valerie curled up on the bed and stared at the phone again, hoping maybe, just maybe, Haley would write back. She didn't. Not that night. Not the next morning. And somewhere across town, the daughter Valerie had once tried to freeze out of family photos. was moving into a house she now owned outright, with floors Valerie picked, and doors she'd never walk through again. The badge didn't beep. Valerie pressed it again, harder this time, like force would somehow override the system's judgment. But the turnstile didn't move. The red light blinked twice, indifferent. She stood there for a beat too long, trying to decide if she should act confused or outraged. She went with confused, less risky. "Must be a glitch," she said to the receptionist, flashing the same rehearsed smile she used when returning items after the return window. "It worked last week." The receptionist didn't move. She didn't even fake a smile, just pressed something under the desk and looked away. Two security officers were already approaching from the hallway. Both men, built like they'd been pulled out of casting for generic corporate security number one. One older, one younger, both wearing that expression that said they'd done this before, and recently. "Ms. Harmon," the older one said, not unkindly, "we'll need you to come with us." "I work here," Valerie said flatly. "You're listed as a contractor," he corrected. "But per directive from compliance, we've been instructed to revoke all access and escort you off-site." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Escort?" she repeated, as if it were a slur. The younger one handed her a manila envelope. "Documentation from legal." She tore it open, hands shaking just slightly. "Notice of termination, effective immediately. By directive of the Board of Ethics and Legal Compliance, your contract has been nullified due to violations of discretionary access policy, unauthorized account activity, and improper use of executive credentials." The bottom was signed by someone she didn't recognize. Not Glenn, not even someone in HR. Just a flat title, Internal Counsel, Risk Division. She turned toward the desk, eyes darting. "Get Glenn. Now. He'll fix this. He's in a board session," the receptionist said without looking up. "And you're no longer on the approved contact list." That line hit her harder than the envelope. Approved contact list. She wasn't even recognizable to the system anymore. Valerie's voice rose. "This is absurd. I'm a consultant. My name is on projects that brought this company 7 figures. Check the deliverables on the investor pitch from Q2. The younger guard shifted, just slightly. "Ma'am, let's not make this harder than it has to be." "This isn't happening," she muttered, stepping back. "This is a mistake." But her badge, still in her hand, blinked again. Red. No error message. Just a digital no. They didn't handcuff her. No one dragged her. But somehow, the quiet walk across the polished tile felt more humiliating than anything else. People looked up. She recognized faces. Some gave tight, pitying smiles. Most looked down, pretending to answer emails. No one stopped her. By the time she hit the revolving glass door, her cheeks were burning. Not from rage, from understanding. They'd been waiting for this. She stepped into the afternoon sunlight and immediately regretted it. The parking lot was too open, too bright. Her car was gone. She'd given it to valet the day before and hadn't claimed it. She didn't even remember where her ticket was. She walked to the edge of the lot and sat on the concrete parking block, ignoring the way her heels dug into the back of her ankle. Pulled out her phone. Opened her inbox. One new message. Subject, advice. From Mark. She didn't breathe as she opened it. It was only one sentence. "Next time someone offers you a first-class seat, ask what the landing looks like." No sign-off. No punctuation. No gloating. Just a single reminder. He had seen the entire arc of her trajectory long before the takeoff. She looked up at the building behind her, the mirrored glass that used to reflect her ambition. Now it just reflected someone lost. Someone who didn't realize that high altitudes only help if you know where the runway is. And Valerie? She'd never bothered to check where the ride ended, because she thought someone else would always be there to catch her when she fell, until the someone she underestimated the most became the architect of the landing. The mailbox stuck. She had to yank it twice before it gave, metal screeching against metal like even it resented her now. Inside, a single envelope, cream-colored, thick paper. No return address. No handwriting. Just her name typed, centered, precise. She knew before she opened it. Back inside the apartment. No, the unit, as the leasing office insisted on calling it. Boxes were stacked along the walls like a moving crew had just dropped her off and forgotten to come back. The furniture was temporary. A gray sofa that smelled like synthetic regret. A coffee table too low for usefulness. Even the carpet felt like it belonged to someone else. She tore the envelope open with her thumb. Inside was a cashier's check for $11,743.82. Stapled to it, one sheet of white paper, printed in the same crisp font. Your portion of the last fiscal quarter's discretionary income. Per our agreement. That was it. No signature. No note. No name. Just the math. The number wasn't random. It was specific, surgical. It wasn't generous, but it wasn't punitive either. It was accurate, down to the cent, which somehow made it worse. Valerie stared at it, sitting cross-legged on the floor, legs half-numb under her, surrounded by IKEA cartons and promises she once made about leveling up. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't just sit in your ears, it presses against your ribs. She reached for her phone, almost without thinking, and opened the Photos app. Scrolled until she found the one image she hadn't been able to delete. Not yet. Her and Glenn at the gate, smiling, champagne in hand, just before boarding. It had seemed like the moment everything started. Now she understood. It was the snapshot of everything ending. Her smile in the photo was smug, triumphant. Glenn's was tighter, like he wasn't sure they were getting away with something but wanted to believe they were. She stared at it for a long moment, then hit delete. The screen asked her, "Are you sure?" She pressed yes. The screen faded back to the bland gallery. Nothing worth keeping. Valerie stood up slowly, knees aching. She glanced around the apartment. Not a single object that felt like it had a story. No more floor-to-ceiling windows. No gate code. No garden hose to trip over on the weekends. No silverware that belonged in the family. Just rented walls. And a check that was equal parts tombstone and invoice. She walked to the window and pulled the blinds. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with leaf blowers and cheap landscaping trucks. No hedges. No symmetry. She used to laugh at Mark. Called him the spreadsheet whisperer. Mocked his insistence on balance sheets and exit strategies. But now she saw it. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't chased. He'd just audited the life she thought she had. Every account. Every asset. Every relationship. One by one. And then, he quietly withdrew. Withdrew from the marriage. From the house. From the company. From her. Not in rage, but with precision. With a ledger in one hand and the delete key in the other. He left her nothing dramatic. No scenes. No shouting. Just silence. And a check that said, "This is what you're worth." No more. No less. Valerie sat back down on the floor, legs crossed, the check limp in her hands. There was nothing left to fight. Because she wasn't part of the story anymore. And Mark? He didn't just win. He balanced the account.